Today we're going to do a brief video on canning bean soup. So I went to the store. I bought 1 pound of small white beans, which is approximately 2 cups of beans dried. And I've rinsed the beans. I've sorted through them. They look pretty good. I've had them soaking in water for about 3 hours now, and I need to add more water. They're really soaking up the water quickly. We want to can this soup, so we're going to do it according to USDA recommendations. To add to our soup, we have chopped celery, chopped carrot, chopped onion. I'm going to chop those a little finer. We've got some garlic, bay leaf, and a little thyme. And for flavoring, we're going to use ham. Now, the USDA has never tested using cure meats such as hams to make soups or to can them by themselves, so it is not recommended to can a ham and bean soup. I have done so in the past, and I haven't had any issue, but I don't want to waste my holiday ham bones, so I'm going to use this to make my broth. And we have a little bit of leftover ham in there. When you're canning ham and bean soup, the recommendation from the authorities is to only put like 1 cube of ham in your jar, just for flavoring. So we're going to do a little more than that. But now the USDA has a recipe that they have recommended in the past for ham and split pea soup. So I feel comfortable canning this. No problem. Oh, and I've also got some broth. I made pork broth from pork bones, so I think that'll go really nicely with this soup. So once these beans have soaked a little longer, we're going to get this into jars and jar it up. We'll put everything into the pot with the ham and make a good broth, and then we'll get this all canned up. We will be pressure canning this soup because, as you know, vegetables must be pressure canned. They are a low acid food, and they cannot be water bath canned at all. It's out of the question. Also, when I prepared these, I did peel. You're supposed to peel your root vegetables, including carrots. So I did peel these before I chopped them. I also peeled my onions. I cut off the root ends. So those are nice and clean, and that's to decrease your chance of botulism down the road. And we're going to use some thyme leaves for flavoring. There's also controversy involved in canning bean soup itself or canning beans. A lot of people recommend, and this has not been tested either by the USDA, to can your beans dry and let them absorb the liquid as you're canning them. And while it could be safe, we don't know for sure because there has not been testing done on that. There has not been any canning official testing done since, I believe, the late 1940s. So that's what we have to go on. Hopefully, one of the companies that produce our canning supplies would test some of these items to make sure they would be safe to can and the method we should use. But until they do, we have to use the established method, which is to soak our beans either overnight or for several hours before we start making our soup. And then we'll put in all the ingredients, we'll let it come up to a boil, and we'll get it into the jars. Now, it's possible for ham. Like I said, they have not tested canning ham, and it's a density issue. There's a lot of salt in ham, and it may be that it would require more canning time because of the density of the meat, and the meat dries out a little bit because of the salt that's used in the curing process. And it may be that it might take less processing time because it has salt and other preservatives. We just don't know. So until somebody does officially test it, we have to follow the safe guidelines. And canning of ham broth has never been tested either. So you have to bear all these considerations in mind when you're home canning. So bear in mind that this recipe has not been tested. I feel comfortable canning this soup, but you may not. You could certainly substitute another type of broth, pork broth, chicken broth, that type of thing in your soup. All right, so everything is in the pot. All our vegetables, 3 pints of broth, the beans that have been soaked for about 5 hours. They're about halfway soft. We're going to bring them up to a boil in the broth and then let the whole thing here boil for 2 minutes. And then we can can up some soup. The timing for soup, if you have a soup the jars are halfway filled with solids and halfway filled with liquids, 60 minutes for pints, 75 for quarts. But because I'm using ham, I'm going to use the meat time, which will be 75 minutes for pints or 90 minutes for quarts. And I'll probably do quarts with this. Alrighty, I decided to go with these lovely 1.5 pint jars. And that's another measure of safety in my opinion. I'm going to process these 1.5 pint jars for the quart time, which is probably a little bit longer than you really need to, but since I'm canning a ham broth, I'm going to use 1.5 pint jars and do it for the quart time. This is a big pot of soup. I believe this is a 12-quart stock pot. So it's taking it a while to come up to the proper temperature, but that's all right. And I personally don't mind if my beans are softer than normal after they've come out of the canner. I know some people like to have their beans a little firm, but I do not. I would rather have them soft. So we'll probably go ahead and cook. We have soaked the beans. We're going to cook them for longer than the 2 minutes. I'll probably cook all this together for about 15 minutes or so. Once it comes to a boil, I'll let it simmer on the stovetop for a little while. Well, our soup is coming along. It's been simmering for about 30 minutes, and I'm going to let it simmer for an hour. And I don't have a huge amount of beans in here. It's a little bit of meat, a little bit of vegetables, a little bit of white beans. I'm going to wait till the beans are pretty much cooked. Now there is a recipe that was tested by the FDA, and that is for ham and split pea soup. And they use a significant amount of ham in that recipe, so I feel pretty confident in using some ham as long as I've got a lot of broth in my soup. Split peas, as you know, are a legume, which is similar to the beans. And we're also using a small amount of ham, mostly for flavor, but also, of course, it's delicious to taste the ham in your soup. We're using beans instead of split peas. And of course, all our veggies, so this is going to be awesome. A really good soup. So I have my 1.5 pint jars here in the canner warming. And we're going to get this canned up in just a few minutes, as soon as it simmers a little bit longer. I'm going to test a bean and make sure that it's tender. And let me tell you, this broth is delicious. I'm hoping I have enough to fill these 8 jars, 1.5 pint jars, and maybe a little left over for our dinner this evening. So we'll see how that goes. Oh, that's so delicious. That's just delicious. Oh, yum. Yum, yum, yum. And I've got a little bit of the ham glaze. You know, this was our Christmas ham, so we've got a little bit of that clove, ginger, spicy mixture going on there. Just a little bit, you know, to flavor it. A little bit of sweetness, a little bit of savory. A really, really good soup. Okay, we'll come back in about half an hour, and by then the beans should be nice and cooked through, tender, soft. And then we'll get this canned up. Okay, let's get our warm jars out of the canner. I love this 1.5 pint size. If you can find these somewhere, you go ahead and grab them because they're a great size. For a meal for 2, they've got the straight sides, so it's easy to get food out of these jars. I caught a good sale on these this week. They were like $2 per jar at Hobby Lobby, of all places. They were the ball jars with the ball lids, so I grabbed what I could. They were 50% off, which made them $2 each. Whoop. And of course, you got to be careful. None of that clanking like I'm doing. trying to do this one-handed and hold the camera with the other hand, so it's a little difficult. This is my favorite thing to can every year after Christmas. I use that Christmas ham bone and get that ham and bean soup. And normally I would make 15 bean soup. But with the 15 bean soup, there are some smaller beans like barley and so forth, and that just sort of cooked into mush. So I'm using beans with a more uniform size, and that is the small white beans. So that should make a more uniform type of a product. Alrighty, let's get these filled. Here for Christmas, I received a Prep Work Progressive canning funnel. So that's going to be awesome. I took some of the ham out and we're going to divvy that amongst these jars. So let's see if it's pretty much cool enough to handle. So I've got 8 jars. I need to kind of divvy this up amongst the 8 jars. And remember, according to USDA, we're putting just enough to kind of flavor. But you can also make it with ham as a soup, and there's no real restriction on using it as an ingredient for soup. However, if you're going to make it as a soup, you need to kind of stick with the guideline of half the can being solids and the remainder being broth. And the more liquid you have, liquid is a good method of heat transfer. So that is why a soup that's 50% broth at least can be safely canned, using a shorter time than you would, say, just for the meat. Like if you were just canning meat, the recommendation would be 90 minutes to can these pint and a half or quart jars with meat. But for soup, I believe it's 75 minutes for quarts. And only 60 minutes for pints. And that's because you've got that large amount of liquid in there, the heat transfers more readily, and the processing time is shorter as a consequence. And if you wanted to be more precise, you could weigh this meat. But you know, I'm just sort of giving it a rough measurement here. A couple of handfuls in each jar. And see, the amount is not that much. It's just mostly for flavoring. There's a little bit of more meat in the soup itself, and we'll probably get a little more in each jar as I transfer some of the solids into these jars. Well, I really got this bubbling. I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit. And I'm going to fish out as best I can solids to put into the jars. And we're almost to that halfway mark. I think I'm going to go ahead and proceed to the next jar because I don't know if I'm going to have quite enough solids to fill the jars halfway. I may have a little more than half liquid and the rest solids. Ooh. So I am using my slotted spoon for this portion. So we've got our ham at the bottom. We've got some beans. I have to say, I love this new funnel. Beans are just at that state where they're tender crisp. They are cooked through, and they're going to continue to cook a little more during the processing of the jars. So I'm kind of giving every jar like 2 of these spoons full of beans and veggies. I'm running a little low on beans. I probably could have used 2 pounds of beans for this soup, but it's okay. It's going to be a very brothy soup. That'll be very safe to can. Okay, so we're almost halfway up these jars with solids. Almost. And we can go over halfway. I mean, we can go with a little bit less than halfway if we need to. I'm going to just continue to fish out some more solids out of the soup, and I'll be right back. We've got about our 50% solids in our jars. Some have a little more veggies than others, so that's just the way it goes. And now we're going to put the broth. Get these jars filled all the way. I'm not quite filling them up to the 1-inch headspace just yet. I want to make sure I don't need to add more broth to my pot. I don't think I do, but it remains to be seen. Oh, just 2 more and I've got plenty of broth, so I guess we're good. I'm going to go ahead and fill these all to the 1-inch headspace. One more. little bit more in here. And a little bit more in here. Okay, we're going to wipe our rims with some vinegar and get the lids on and get these processing. Now technically for these 1.5 pint jars we need to process for 75 minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and do 90 minutes because we've got ham in there and I want to make sure it's safe. And we have enough left for our dinner, so yay. Alrighty, this is a soup, so it's doubtful that we need to debubble, but it's always good practice. And then to check our headspace, I can tell about 1 inch of headspace is where you filter this bottom ring, but this is our headspace measuring tool, and this tells us that we have indeed 1 inch of headspace. Let's see, the bottom marker is the inch, the second from the bottom is 3/4, the middle is 1/2 inch, and the first notch would be 1/4 inch, which would be like for your jams and jellies. But most of the time you need 1 inch of headspace when you're pressure canning meats and vegetables and that kind of stuff. And these are good. They have about 1 inch of headspace. If you leave less headspace, it's not desirable because the jar will not be able to safely seal. There'll be too much airspace in there. And if you leave less than 1 inch of headspace, you stand the chance of your contents bubbling over and siphoning into the canning pot. So I've already wiped the rims. I've taken a napkin with some vinegar and gone around to the top of every jar, like so, and made sure they're nice and clean. Next thing we're going to do is put our lid, kind of center it, and our ring to the fingertip tight level. And that means just so that it's tight like that and not too tight. If it's too tight, the air can't vent out and your lid might buckle. And then we're going to place this back into our canner. And we'll repeat this process until we have all our jars inside the canner. I've got my canner on a medium-high heat, and we're getting ready to start the processing. So we'll come back when we've got all the jars into the canner. There we have our 8 beautiful 1.5 pints of ham and bean soup. So we're going to put the lid on the canner. Going to slide the lid into place. We're going to continue to keep this at medium to high heat until we see a strong plume of steam coming out of this vent hole. At that point, we'll set our timer for 10 minutes and let this canner vent for 10 minutes. And after that, I will put on my weight for my elevation of less than 1,000 feet. The weight is 10 pounds. If you're higher elevation than 1,000 feet, you'll probably want to use the 15-pound weight, but check for the directions for your elevation on the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And once the weight starts to gently rock back and forth, we're going to set our timer for 90 minutes because we're doing 1.5 pints. And for soup, the recommendation is to do it for 75 minutes, but because I have a significant amount of ham in there, and I'm going to give myself an extra 15-minute cushion. Safety margin, I guess you'd say. Okay, it's sort of difficult to see. We've got a steady plume of steam coming up through that vent, and I've set my timer for 10 minutes. And after this is vented for 10 minutes, we'll put the weight on. Okay, our buzzer has sounded. The 10 minutes has elapsed. Now I'm going to put my 10-pound weight. There we go. And when that starts to gently rock, we'll set our timer for 90 minutes. Okay. Our weight's rocking and rolling, and we're going to set our timer. We'll be back when this is finished processing. And you want to watch to make sure this weight rocks gently like this for the whole processing time. You can adjust your heat downward a little bit. If it looks like it's rocking too much, you don't want all your steam to boil out of your canner. That would be bad. That would ruin your canner. But I just reduced my heat slightly, and I know for this stove I'm going to need to be approximately between 5 and 6 to keep that gently rocking for the entire processing time. Our timer finished. I waited until the pin dropped and then I removed the weight. And we're going to just let this cool down naturally for another few minutes, and then we'll open the lid and remove the contents. So we'll come back when that's done. Well, the soup is out of the canner. Everything's bubbling and hot. We're going to just let this cool and take care of it tomorrow morning. Get it washed and put away. Looks really nice. And as you can see, the beans did not cook away, even though they were very tender when I put them in. I am just absolutely thrilled with these. Ham and bean soup is my favorite. We've got enough here for, I don't know, how many months into the year. How often will we eat it? Once a month, and we've got 8 months worth. Once a week, we've got 8 weeks worth. Okay. Well, thank you for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Have a really great rest of 2022, and we will see you all, and I will talk to you again very soon. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.